Alright, in this video I'm going to, I guess, do an introduction to the new version of Molecular Script. They call it Molecular Plus. Now, this new version only works for 2.92, Blender 2.92, and Blender 2.93. I will put the link to this webpage in the description of the video, and this is where you download the Molecular Script or Molecular Plus add-on. Alright, it says right here if you're using Blender 2.92, use the 37M version, and obviously this is a typo, they meant 2.93, use the Python 39 version. Alright, down here, since I have the 2.92 version, the one I would want to download would be this one. I don't know why I said the M version, because the M version is supposed to be for the I guess that's for Macintosh, but yeah, this is the one I want, the 37M. Alright, now if you had the 2.93, of course you'd want this one. Alright, assuming you're using Windows, of course. Alright, now for the most part this molecular script works the same as it did before. And if you are not familiar with the old one, yeah, I would suggest probably familiarizing yourself with it, or just watch tutorials, the new tutorials that will be, of course, coming out in regards to molecular script. Of course, this right here is not really going to be a tutorial. I'm going to go ahead and hide my camera too. Now, I'm going to use this cube as an emitter, and it's going to be emitting molecular script particles. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and add a floor, add mesh, and then a plane, and I'm just going to scale that up to yay big, and then grab it on the Z-axis and bring it down here. Now my middle mouse button is wearing out, so I'm having trouble navigating because that button does not want to work, so I'm waiting for my mouse to come in. That won't come in until tomorrow, which is one reason why I'm doing this instead of an actual tutorial or animation, because it's just been a headache to try to use that middle mouse button lately. Alright, now of course the floor is going to be a collision object because the floor is what the particles are going to be impacting or falling on. Okay, I'm going to press Ctrl A to apply the scale since we did change it. I'm going to bring out the side panel, and over here is your or some of the molecular script or molecular plus settings. Alright, now what I want to do at this point, I need to turn this plane into a collision object. So I'm just going to come over to the physics settings and then click collision, and then you have some settings down here I'll go through kind of briefly. Now the only ones that are going to affect the particle system, which is what we're using, the molecular script uses the particle system, are these. Alright, the only ones that most people really use are dampening and friction. That's it. The rest of them, for the most part, people leave them alone, except in certain edge cases. Dampening, of course, controls how much the particles bounce off of the surface. If you want it to bounce forever, basically it bounces back up just as far up as it fell from. You would keep that at 0. If you put this at 0.5, then if it fell from 1 meter, it would bounce up to a half meter. You get what I mean? And if I put this on 0.1, then it's going to fall 1 meter and then bounce back up 0.9 meters, because 0.1 or 10% of the speed or velocity was dampened out of it. but in most cases I put this on about 0.6. Alright, now the friction is obviously how much the particles slide across the surface, because although the particle system is generally using spheres or icospheres or something like that, it's not actually rolling across the surface, it just slides across the surface. So you need to set this to something that would make sense. Now if you have it set at 0, obviously it will slide forever, there's no resistance, but generally putting it on about 0.1 makes sense, maybe 0.05. Alright, now we're going to actually set up the emitter here. So I'm going to press 1 to go on the front side view, and then I'm going to go into wireframe so we can see inside. Now I meant to go ahead and do this first. I'm going to go ahead and add an instancing object. Now this instancing object is what will be duplicated by this emitter. Add mesh, and I'm just going to use a sphere. Alright, now I'm just going to grab Z, then drop it down below the floor so that you can't see it whenever you're in solid view, because you don't need to see this, it's just there. Alright, now I'm going to go back to this cube. Now on this molecular script part, there is one thing that's new from before, or actually a couple things, but this one thing I have not quite understood what the purpose of it is, but I know if you don't do this it kind of gets glitchy. Alright, it has this right here, which they call it voxel size grid. I kind of understand what they mean by that. It means, like, if it's set to 0.1, it means that it's divided up in 10 by 10 by 10. Alright, but that kind of defeats the purpose, being that you have where are these, the settings that will be over here and so forth in a minute. Now I'm going to go ahead and set this to a 3D grid. Alright, and what that essentially does, it basically fills the cube with molecular script objects, or molecular script particles. Alright, now since this was set to 0.1, you would think that it would be 10 by 10, but it's not. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So I don't really understand what this is and how it correlates to this. It doesn't make sense to me. But I have found out that if you don't do this a certain way, it kind of glitches. So I'm going to say I want 20 particles by 20 particles. So if you take 1 and divide it by 20, I mean that's 0.05, right? 0.05. Alright, now if you come over here to the particle settings and then you choose source, it's already set to volume, it's already set to grid, but for some reason it's set to 19, which is weird to me. Now I go ahead and set this to 20. Alright, and then whenever I come down here to let's see, render and viewport, now this controls the size of the particles. This one will control the size of the particles in the viewport, and this one will control the size of the particles when rendered. For the life of me, I do not understand why it wants to render it larger than it shows you here. So I always set these the same and go by the viewport, but if you change one, you got to change the other. I do not have a clue why they're set up this way, where this one's exactly twice the size of this. It makes no sense to me. Alright, now since we created this, my middle mouse button is getting on my nerves. Since we created this sphere, we're going to add this sphere in here so that it's actually duplicating this sphere for each of these particles. So change this from halo to object, and then where it says instancing object, add that sphere. Alright. Now if we look, we can see that each one of these particles are now spheres. Alright. Now, to make it quicker in the viewport, change it from, on the viewport, change it from rendered to circle. Alright, now since we have these 20 across, and this cube is 2 meters across, because we didn't change the size of the cube. So if we look at the cube, it's still 2 meters, right? So what's 2 meters divided by 20? That's 0.1, right? So if we set this to 0.1, you would think that it would fill up perfectly, but it doesn't for some reason. With the old molecular script, if I would have done this, it would have filled it up perfectly. End-to-end spheres along the distance of this cube, which it doesn't do that anymore, so I don't understand exactly what's going on. So the only alternative you have is to basically fiddle with this. Now I can kind of look at it and see that this sphere, the edge is going to the center of this sphere. So I know that it's going to be about half the size is what we need. 0.05, enter. And sure enough, that's the size you actually need. Alright, because they're butted side by side. But this is another thing that I don't understand why it's set up this way. It automatically defaults to putting a little bit of random size to it. And for the most part, when you're dealing with molecular script, I have never seen a reason to use random size to any extent, but it defaults. It adds a 0.02% or 2% random size to it. So I turn the random size off, and that's the size we need. Now it's showing 0.05, but now the object or the render size is 0.053. Where did the 0.053 come from? Well, that's because originally this was down here was set to 0.026 or something like that. So it was exactly twice the size. Again, it doesn't make sense, because I want these to be the same size as the viewport, 0.05. Alright, now that's the weird parts about this that's different, that I don't understand why it's the way it is. Now don't misunderstand me, I'm not ragging on this new add-on, because quite frankly it's far more stable than the previous molecular script versions, unless you go back to like 2.7 something. This is far more stable, and it calculates quicker than it did before. But there's clearly some bugs in it, or something about it that I don't understand yet, and it makes some of these things seem weird, but ultimately you just have to fiddle with it to get it right. And the biggest thing that I've seen is go ahead and get rid of this scale randomness, because it typically messes things up. Alright, now suppose we want, this is another thing that's totally different than the way it was before. If right now let me go ahead and put this in solid view so we can actually see a little bit. If we was to start the simulation right now, what happens? The molecular script particles fall and then just hit this floor, which is basically what we want. Alright. Now, suppose we want to connect these molecular script particles so that they are actually kind of glued together. Before we would do that here, there would be another panel down here that would have linking settings so that you could actually link the particles together. But now, some of the settings are here, some of the settings are here, and now some of the settings are here. This is another thing I don't understand. I like having this panel here, but all of these settings and all of these settings should be in the same place, in my opinion. Some people, obviously the people who wrote this or created this add-on, believe they should be separated. I kind of understand why they believe it should be separated, because these are all particle settings, wherein these are the physics settings. But all of these physics settings are part of these particle settings. So in my opinion, they should have been kept together. But whatever. I mean, these people who create these add-ons are smarter than I am, so. But anyway, if you wanted to link the particles together now, they're no longer here, they're in the physics settings. And this is also where you can control whether or not they collide with particles from other emitters, which would be here, collision with others. And then you can control the friction of particles, the friction between particles. You know, how much friction this particle will have with this particle, and so forth. It's right here. And then you have the dampening, which is the dampening between particles, not between the particles and the collision objects. I'm also getting kind of a sore throat, so my voice doesn't quite sound right. Alright. Now, down here you have your linking settings. If you click link at birth, then it brings up all the linking settings. Now before, with the old version, all the linking settings were shown here, whether or not they were linked or not. Now you actually have to click link at birth to bring up this panel. Now, one thing I will say, the people who created this new add-on, they properly set these settings to a good default setting. Now, 3.5, in my opinion, is the perfect settings in almost every case. And that's the search length between links. Basically, this particle will look the width of 3.5 particles out for other particles to link to. Alright? And it creates a maximum of 16 links. And then tension, for the most part, I've always kept it at 1, except in extremely rare cases. And for the most part, if this is 3.5 and this is 16, realistically the only one here that you change 99% of the time is the broken length. And right now it's set to 0.5. Now, that's not 0.5 meters, that's 0.5 the distance of a particle. Let me zoom in just a little bit, because like this number represents 3.5 distances of here to here, 3.5 diameters of a particle. So 1, 2, 3.5. That's this setting right here, 3.5. Like this, the broken one, that's a half particle width. So it's basically here to here. And what the broken actually means is that the link, let's say if this particle is linked to this particle, then these particles can separate by this distance from here to here before that link breaks. Alright? Now, obviously, you can't really control which, with these settings, you can't really control, you can't say link this particle to this particle and link this one to this one. It just, it randomly looks out this distance from the center of each particle and then makes 16 connections. Alright, now you can change this number, but 16 seems to be a pretty good number. Now, there is something called weak maps. There is a way to, it's down here. I've never tried it. I just heard about it a couple days ago. But this is a way of using a texture to control how strong these links are and how easily they will break. I don't know how it works, I just know it's there. Eventually I'm going to figure this out because something like that seems like it'd be interesting. But, just for example's sake, let's keep this to 0.5 and let's start the simulation again and see what happens. Now, I'm going to tell you what I think will happen. Here's the floor. I think it's going to fall. Actually, I'm going to raise this floor up a little bit. Grab Z so it doesn't have to fall as far. I think these particles are going to fall, and then it's going to kind of be kind of spongy, but still fall apart. Well, no, just kind of spongy. Like I said, it's more stable than it was before. If this would have been the old molecular script, it wouldn't hold together right now. You would have to tweak the settings a whole lot more to get it to hold together, which it actually did pretty good. This is what I mean by it being more stable, and it's actually quicker. You can see how quickly it's actually baking also. Now, suppose I don't want it to be that spongy. I can turn this down. Let's say 0.1. That means each link can only stretch 1/5 as far as before it breaks. Let me click Start Simulation. Now see, it broke. A lot of them broke loose, but it didn't bounce as much. Now what if I want them to hold together better now? Now if I want them to hold together better, all I need to do is turn this up steps. Let's say I'm going to turn this up to 30. Now I'm going to click Start Simulation. Now see how much slower it's going now? That's because instead of 8 subframes you have 30 subframes. But see the difference? It's still rubbery, but it's nowhere near as rubbery as it was originally when this was set to 0.5. But it held together now because we turned this up to 30. This can make for some fun stuff once you learn the settings and get past the weirdness of the settings. Alright, we'll go ahead and free the bake now. Suppose we want this even stiffer and have less rubber to it, you know, something kind of, suppose you want it to be more brittle. I'm going to turn this down so that the links are 1/4 as long as these before they break. So I'm going to set this to 0.025. Alright, now the links are much shorter. They break much easier. I'm going to go ahead and click Start. Now it should be more brittle, less rubbery, but it will probably start breaking. Yeah, see? suppose we want it to be stronger. We can turn this up to, let's say, 60. Now again, it's going to slow down quite a bit. It's still calculating just as many frames per second, except you have 60 subframes now. Now in terms of true frames, it's calculating true frames, which you can see your true frames right here, and they are much slower. See, it still had a little bit of bounce to it, and some of them still wanting to break off, but nowhere near as before. Alright, now let me change this just a hair. Rotate on the y-axis. Now if I was to do that again, it's falling on the edge, so of course more of them are going to break off. Now you can still see a little bit of rubbery effect, and it kind of wants to bounce, but it seems more rubbery right now because you're literally looking at it in slow motion. Because we're actually seeing this right now at like, if we look up here, these are frames including subframes. We're actually processing at about 50 frames. Yeah, about 50 frames per second. Now that's including subframes, which true frames we're processing maybe 1 frame a second, something like that. Now it's still got that little jello look to it, but see, if we hit escape and then if we actually play it in real time, see, it doesn't look nowhere near as rubbery, although it kind of got glitchy because we didn't finish baking it. Alright, now let's just assume we want it to be even more brittle. Set this to 0.01. Alright, start simulation. And of course, it takes a lot of trial and error to get it exactly how you want it, which is one reason why molecular script is so slow. Especially if you want stuff like this, where it's going to be more brittle, because you got to use high subframes, and low broken numbers. And of course, this isn't even that many particles. I mean, this is just a 20 by 20 by 20 grid. That's what, 600, no, what am I thinking? That's 6,000 particles, something like that. Alright, now if we hit escape and then play it at real-time speed now, see, that actually looked halfway decent. Almost looked like something literally falling and breaking. But yeah, that's pretty much all I'm going to do with this. I just wanted to kind of give you enough information about the new molecular script so you can start fiddling with it. And like I said, if you are familiar with the old version of the molecular script, a lot of this stuff will, you'll probably be searching around because everything's spread out over 3 panels now, but you'll be able to figure it out. But this is one thing I want to ask people. What's the purpose of this voxel size for grid? What's the purpose of that when right here you have grid resolution, which grid resolution is the same right here. These settings are the same as it was in the old molecular script, and the resolution is basically, I have it set to 20, which means it's 20 particles that way, and then of course 20 particles this way. So what's the purpose of this if you still have this? And if these are the same, then why not just call this resolution and then put allow you to put an actual number in it instead of basically a fraction. So I don't quite understand what the purpose of that is. Maybe someone has the answer and they can explain it to me so that it makes sense. Keep in mind, I'm not that smart, so it's probably something obvious. And I guess that's pretty much it. If you found this useful, great. Comment, share, all that good jazzy stuff. And don't forget, I will put a link to this page in the description of this video. And I guess that's it. If you have any questions, leave a comment below, and I do my best to reply to every comment, especially questions. Sometimes it takes several days to get to you, but I try anyway. I guess that's it. Later, people.